the topic actually stems from my interest earlier on my study of immigrants or new immigrants to other countries, such as employment in Australia, residential mobility in Australia, astronaut families in Australia and Canada. Then I discovered early migrants, which are as interesting but least studied. Then recently I'm looking into the young generation, the so-called 1.5 generation migrants who went with their parents. And when I look at these topics, each time I find new areas to look into, new arenas, and I realize that these students, these young people who went with their parents, the so-called 1.5 generation, usually completed their tertiary education, and you think they may return to Taiwan as some of the parents do. For some reasons they don't, they stayed, they did quite well, and some of them reportedly have gone abroad to another country. Where too, there are no statistics to support this, and by word of mouth, I know that Hong Kong also did very similar things after, for example, immigrating to New Zealand, have not stayed but moved somewhere else. So I'm very interested in doing qualitative studies these days, and I thought using very similar methodology and meeting Taiwanese abroad, and who has been very helpful to me, I will continue to do this, but this time on the young people who has moved to other places. And I have selected two places which are closest to Taiwan, which is Hong Kong and Singapore. And I happen to have the advantage of speaking Cantonese and Guoyu and English, so I have been using these as research tools. And qualitative studies have been fascinating to me. You may not be impressed by the number of samples. Usually people say, oh, you only have 8 people in your population. Well, wait, I think they reveals a lot about the globalization element and the driving force behind individual migration behavior. And I hope I have time to tell you some of the stories. Looking at Singapore, I feel that they have really, I can use the word aggressive immigration policy. They try to attract young global talents, and they have several organizations to do this, try to increase global competitiveness based on human power. And they have high pay and also friendly working environment to attract people. And these organizations that are discovered on the internet, Economic Strategies Committee, they wrote a white paper of 2013 saying that they will increase the population to 6.9 million in a certain day, and 45% of foreign-born will be in its territory. I cannot imagine Taiwan have 45% people who are from born abroad. Okay, for Singapore, they also have the Ministry of Manpower Singapore. I try to include the Chinese for these key names. Key institutions. Contact Singapore is another one, and the Overseas Singaporean Unit is one, and then the National Population and Talent Division. So they were doing it for real. Okay, high salary, housing subsidy, low tax, they were introduced as incentives for recruiting overseas talents. And then their graduate students, if they were going there for study, graduate students, they can apply for employment and permanent residency in 1 or 2 years. This will not happen in Taiwan. And then the Ministry of Manpower also established a system where the young people can go online, have a self-evaluation, and see if they have the right credential and try to find the right jobs. How about Hong Kong? Hong Kong SAR, how do they attract young global talent? Less aggressive as the Singapore government is doing, but the Hong Kong started program in 2006 to attract well-qualified people from abroad to work in Hong Kong. And of course, they look for qualifications such as the right age, working experience, and language ability, but these has become less demanding because they want to attract people in a more effective way. And as a whole, Hong Kong has a very open approach to policy, and they would also revise the policy accordingly, and they are also vigorously recruiting human power from overseas, including the encouragement of foreign students to stay on to work. So coming to my paper with this as background of how the different countries or regions are trying to attract young people, I mainly examined the young Taiwanese who have moved directly from Taiwan or another country before migrating to Hong Kong or Singapore. If you remember what I said earlier, I tried to find out what happened to the 1.5 generation. It was very hard to find them. So I switched my strategy of looking for people, and whoever qualified will be those who has an education abroad, has not come back to Taiwan, and has moved to Hong Kong or Singapore to work. So I conducted face-to-face interviews in 2011 to 2014. Up to the time I have returned to Taiwan, I find that they are quite helpful. And when they come back to a visit in Taiwan from Hong Kong, some of them are willing to sit down with me for lunch and let them know. I developed a strategy that I would include very nuanced understanding of the interviewees and also the environment, the context, and so on and so forth. So each interview can spend, I can spend up to 2 hours for each interview for these people. I know that in Hong Kong it would not be possible. Even if the same person sitting down with me, I don't think the shopkeepers or the cafeteria would allow us to sit there more than half an hour. They would take a plate away from you and all that. Okay, so the fieldwork has been very encouraging, and my motivation has not been, what I mean is my motivation has even increased in my recent experience, and I've decided to continue this research for another round and to include a larger sample, and so far I have 38. So mainly, I'm looking at these questions, the types and trajectories of movement, how they move from one country to the other and back and here and there, and there's one example to show you very soon. The reasons for choosing either Hong Kong or Shanghai or Singapore, the social and cultural adaptation at the place that they live, and the prospect of returning to Taiwan. This question actually was added with discussion from the interviewee. They said, why don't you interview these people who have returned to Taiwan? Don't you know, Professor, that I have a lot of friends and I can still continue to help you, So involving the interviewee is a methodology that I developed later on by using qualitative research. Okay, the types. In general, I have 7 types here, and the number represented the largest being in Singapore and Hong Kong. These people went for employment or studying and working abroad. This is included, and very much fewer as the others would show. I try to show you some examples of how these types, show you some stories by these types. The first one is I call the trailing spouse, that is following husband. And this happened to be a trailing spouse. At the same time, she is a study mother, that is her children are there, and she is doing a PhD in Singapore, doing a degree from Taiwan. She got a joint degree in a PhD between Singapore and Taiwan. And she did all these and finished. And she actually invited me to be on her oral examination committee. So the pseudonym is the name given to these people, so I will never disclose her name. In Chinese we say Hua Min. Oh, only 3 minutes? Helen thinks the quality of life is much better in Taiwan than in Singapore. I will only read to you the underlying part. And she does not particularly like the high-powered education system in Singapore, where young children attend supplementary schools in Chinese, arithmetic, and science from very early age. She explained to me the Jiasu Wenhua in Singapore. She prefers to return to Taiwan. I find Dawn, this is a professor in a well-known university, and she is employed, and she has been in Hong Kong and Singapore and Canada for 20 years. She speaks highly of Singapore with regard to internationalization, professionalism, and competitiveness. She is very critical of Taiwan. She said, Taiwan is too inward-looking, does not have an international culture that enables foreigners to survive. I said, really? Oh, we don't know until someone told us. And he is very frank, especially critical about Taiwan. He thinks that Taiwan's English is not good enough, social infrastructure and professional conduct is missing at the university. I have seen colleagues who ask their research assistants to babysit and bring the children to the office to do homework. The administrative staff in various departments cannot help with international matters, and we have fewer international students enrolled than students going abroad as exchange students. Well, I can't help thinking and reflecting, yes, that's true. And he said, NUS, given an example of a University of Singapore, is very cosmopolitan and easy to recruit foreigners who can function easily there. And another person is somewhat critical of Singapore. After graduating from the Foreign Languages Department, she worked for 4 years in Hong Kong, 1 year in the Philippines, and then she went to the Netherlands to got a degree. She married a Dutch. Probably she cannot come back to Taiwan to work because her husband would not have the same kind of job that fits his expertise. So both of them wanted to leave, not for Taiwan, and they say, we want to leave Singapore. We feel strong social control here. That's what she confided in me. Okay, and then Priscilla is another person in the finance area, and when she first went to Singapore, they say they look down on people speaking Chinese, and her Chinese, her English is good enough, so she managed to, and she said the people are snobbish and pragmatic in the place that she went, that is Singapore. She can't get used to the weather, the food, apart from the attitude of people mentioned above, and getting in and out of air-conditioned rooms, she got very sick at one time. Okay, and she has friends visiting her, and the friends say, Singapore does not have a soul, don't you realize? And she responded, and she confided in me, she said, I will never love this country. I keep working until I drop every day and let my time go fast. I will not be here for more than 5 years. I earn money and then I go away. Okay, this happened to be a man, and she wrote these list of places he has been to. 35 years old, financial analyst, and I interviewed him in Hong Kong, then he went to Singapore. I tried to look him up in Singapore, then he went to Hong Kong. So we met in 2 places. So US, UK, US, because of company relocation from UK to US, then Singapore and then Hong Kong, and then Singapore and Hong Kong. And finally, he decided to settle down in Singapore. He was married, he had a house, a flat. He said no intention of moving back to Taiwan, nor to mainland China. Okay, of course, he gave me the reason. Then I met the dispatch employee from Taiwan, which I will skip, and then 2 students, one studying actually in Hong Kong U and another 2 in Chinese U. Then I met return migrant, and I met so-called circular migrant. So these are the types I developed in the field, not because I find that in the theory or the typology that I read. But very briefly, I will read you a return migrant. He said, yes, in Hong Kong, the pay is much higher. It's about 2 to 3 times of Taiwan, more opportunities, and the headhunters looked for me. And in Hong Kong, the tax is low, and I earned about 60,000. In Taiwan, much less. So if I come back to Taiwan, I will not expect to earn a good income. However, she's very happy to be back. She's married. She's trying to get a child. And for the money that she earned in Hong Kong, she was able to have a down payment to buy her flat. So her husband also has a flat, and they commute, and they have a very good life. And for her, she just say, if I stay in Hong Kong, it was only for the salary. The quality of life is much better. Probably she can use the word social well-being. That is much better, in her view, in Taiwan compared to Hong Kong. So in conclusion, I would say there are actually millions of people, young people moving these days, but they has not been as studied as they should have been. And usually we look at the passive, we don't usually look at the passive movers of migrants, such as the trailing spouse, or the young people. And actually the potential of the mobile group as a young global talent really should not be underestimated. And they have more chances of obtaining a good education, economic success, and cosmopolitan exposure. And earlier on, I was saying that Hong Kong and Singapore each have very robust policies to attract young talents. Taiwan is doing much less in this regard. So I think the urgent need for Taiwan is to prevent her young educated young professionals from leaving, as well as to attract young global talents from other Asian countries with more vigorous policies. And with lessons learned from Singapore and Hong Kong, I think we should try very, very hard to attract our own citizens back. Thank you.